to COVID Comms. Really appreciate all of you joining us. Today we're planning to share kind of 360-degree communications advice to help small businesses and entrepreneurs cope with the challenges of communicating effectively during this coronavirus pandemic. Please use hashtag COVID Comms if you want to share anything on social during the panel, and we'll be posting content afterwards. We're recording this, so we'll be sharing that out on social as well. It's been a really interesting time. A few short weeks ago, a lot of business leaders felt like the coronavirus was very far away and wasn't very likely to have a major impact on their businesses or much less their personal lives. And today, all of us are facing a very, very strange and different reality. So we wanted to pull some experts together, and thank you to all my friends that were willing to jump on this panel with us. And just wanted to share some kind of best practices for marketing, sales, and advertising during this time. We've had a lot of event cancellations, so we know that a lot of opportunities for education and connection have been lost, at least in person. And so we just want to use this opportunity to, number one, share some of our wisdom and what we've learned from the trenches and helping our own clients cope with this pandemic, but also give you an opportunity to ask some of your questions. If some of you don't have agency partners, we'll be happy to support you in any way that we can and help you make some decisions and understand next steps. So before we kind of get into the nitty gritty, I wanted to introduce our illustrious panelists. For starters, I'm Trish Thomas. I'm the CEO of Team, for those of you that don't know me, and I'm happy to facilitate my friends today. Paul, I guess I'll start with you. So Paul has 3 decades of communications experience. He is at Linhart PR. He's an award-winning PR veteran. His communication strategies deliver powerful business results for clients and drive consistent performance and profitability. Linhart has been named PR Week's Boutique Agency of the Year. Paul's areas of expertise, so you kind of know what he can help with on this call, are corporate communications strategy and messaging, planning and research, media relations, crisis management, and executive and enterprise communications. So thanks for joining, Paul.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
For sure. And Pam, let's hit you next. Pam Stewart owns Ascenza Communications. It's a full-service marketing and communications firm with specialties in media relations, digital engagement, including SEO and influencer marketing. Throughout her career, Pam has represented over 80 companies in the natural products industry, including food, beverage, personal care, and supplement brands, functional ingredient manufacturers and suppliers, as well as med tech companies, restaurants, and more. So she's got a lot of great experience. Thanks for dialing in, Pam. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Next, Darcy. Darcy Toffolo and I are on the Ad Club board together, and she's the executive managing director at the Moore Agency. She has 2 decades of experience building brands through connected experiences. Her insights-led ideas enable companies to authentically connect with their customers. She has a very diverse background spanning retail, fashion, CPG verticals, and Moore's clientele ranges from small businesses to the Fortune 500. So welcome, Darcy.
Thank you so much, Trish.
Yeah, and Max, you're up next. Max is a highly regarded author, the former CEO of School. He specializes in experiential marketing, human-centric media, and excels in articulating purpose in brands and creating content and tools to show it to the world. He's an instructor at Denver Ad School and at the University of Colorado Boulder. Max is also a member of the Adweek Academic Council. So thanks for joining us, Max.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, let's dive in. For one thing, I want to point out to all of you, at the bottom of your screen, if you hover over the bottom of your Zoom window, there's a QA feature. And anytime that you want to ask a question, just type it in right there and it's going to pop up on our screen. And I promise we will get to as many questions as we can. So as an idea hits you or there's something you want us to address, just type it up and we'll try to cover as much as we possibly are able to in our hour and a half together. So Paul, let's kick off with you. Big brands are very exposed and there's little room for error right now. Just like we saw with McDonald's recent logo faux pas, the divided arches did not go over very well. What can you just kind of allude to about the climate of social sensitivity that we're facing right now, and how should brands think about their response?
Yeah, great question, Trish, and thanks again to you and Abigail for setting this up very timely. So you're right. It is a kind of a weird climate, especially on social media. McDonald's Brazil, as you pointed out, did take some grief for their bit they did with the arches separated to acknowledge social distancing. I think my reaction is I would advise brands, all brands, large and small, to take everything that happens on Twitter with a huge grain of salt. That's not to say ignore it, but uh, you just don't take that as your focus group. Brands need to understand where they have permission to play and where their consumers have given them permission to play, and be doing things that are genuinely helpful as opposed to opportunistic or exploitive. Look for opportunities to meet genuine consumer needs with your message, not just a message about your brand, but a message and an activity that adds value for your consumer. And I guess my last piece on this is don't get preachy, especially at this stage. I don't really want to hear from brands about, oh, you have to maintain social. Don't tell me about that. Tell me something else and give me something that I need, whether it's connection or entertainment or information that adds value for me.
Very good advice. Pam, you work with a lot of product and lifestyle brands. How are they approaching the marketplace? And are there any best practices you can kind of recommend for smaller brands?
Yeah, thanks again, Trish, for inviting me to be part of this. So in general, we work with a number of lifestyle brands, and our feeling is that lifestyle brands really need to speak to their customers in a "how can we serve you now" tone. In recent years, the movement to drive messaging around authenticity has really taken flight, and now more than ever, consumers want to trust and believe in the brands they're buying. So minimizing brand forward communications, we think, is key. Focusing on messaging around nurturing and healing and providing moments of luxury when we're in quarantine is serving us really well. DIY is huge, do it yourself. So giving consumers tips on how they can really make their lives more bearable in their four walls. So in our media relations work, we're being very careful about shoving out messaging that is self-serving in any way. A lot of the media we deal with are in New York City as well. And so these people are in the most COVID impacted city in the country. So anyone pitching lifestyle stories to media, they really need to be super aware and considerate of what these people personally are going through.
Yeah,
And it should be about what can we do for you should be the cornerstone of messaging for any brand.
very helpful. Darcy, I wanted to talk about a blog post you wrote a couple weeks ago that was great. The first point you made was around listening. It's easy for brands to just kind of dive into the public discourse with these half-baked, tone-deaf messages. What do you recommend around listening, and why is it so important?
Yes, thank you so much, Trish. Well, building on what Paul and Pam just shared, with brands that really are demonstrating a sense of tone deafness, and I think social listening, I kind of equate it to a game of double Dutch jump rope, where you really need to read the tea leaves and use a tool like a Meltwater or other social listening tools to really understand what conversations are being had out there, and where, kind of similar to that jump rope, can you jump in a way that's truly additive to the conversations that are happening, and that are truly going to benefit your target audience, whether it's your internal constituents or whether it's your consumer. I think, consumers are going to come out of this and remember brands that demonstrate that they truly care. And so listening is really that first step in understanding, what are those topics, what's being said, and how can we demonstrate in a way that's truly authentic that we do care and that we are going to help our customers through this.
Yeah, absolutely. Max, a question for you. So, everything that a brand communicates should be driven by a deep understanding of their audience. And I know this is an area that you've dug into really deeply over the years. How are consumers' attitudes and behaviors shifting right now? And how can brands keep pace with their target customers at such a weird time?
Yeah, it must be quite difficult for a CMO or any agency leader right now to navigate the winds and the waves and the news that is coming forth. I think from a macro perspective, it's obvious that if you look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs in that pyramid, where a lot of marketing and advertising tend to go up into that aspirational or self-actualized place that we've seen advertising pre-COVID try to occupy, I think it's really clear now that a lot of the messaging and advertising is lower on that hierarchy of needs to food, shelter, belonging, companionship, etc. And so that's the macro level that I think should be really internalized by a lot of brands right now, is that really we're looking for solutions as an audience. And the next big battleground that's been brewing for the past 5-10 years in the brand world was all about brand relevancy and brand trust. Right. And brand relevancy is being served right now as to how are these brands showing up and providing solutions, tangible solutions for me that, non-governmental organizations or even the government can't. And also, how do my beliefs and how do I see and find trust in a brand based upon the actions that they're taking in culture, and what is the messaging that they're putting out in culture, and does that align with my internal belief system? Is that engender trust as well? So relevance and trust are the new big battlegrounds, and this has just accelerated that notion tenfold, if not 100-fold. And it's going to be really interesting who comes out ahead in the next 2 quarters or 3 quarters.
Yeah, I agree. It's there's a lot that remains to be shaken out over the next few months. For all of you, I guess I'd love to hear, what do you view the major risks being for brands that decide to just maintain the status quo, stick with their content schedule, their messaging, their tone of voice that were maybe established before the coronavirus pandemic hit? What are they risking in just forging ahead and not rethinking their communication strategy?
I think that I can start with that one, Trish. I think the biggest risk is appearing tone deaf and making sure you're not sharing, the wrong message at the wrong time. I think one of the greatest examples of this, of the need to calibrate your message with your media plan, is early on in the outbreak. Norwegian Cruise Lines maintained their broadcast schedule, and so you've got spots from NCL appearing on CNN while CNN is breaking down the outbreak on the Diamond Princess cruise ship. That's probably not really effective messaging and not a good use of your brand dollars.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I think to Max's point, brand trust is such a critical piece now. And I think now more than ever. And I think we have consumers that are going to, as I mentioned earlier, going to have quick recall after this all, subsides, as to those that are really truly caring about them and putting themselves first versus the brand first. And so I think the risk is not, I think it is about tone deafness, but it's really about brand loyalty long-term, and then also brand referral. The power of the influencer and the consumer cannot be underestimated here. And the brands who are doing it right, I was so blown away by Zappos. Zappos has always been about customer service, and now they're like, we're about customer service for anything. And I think that is so powerful and made me feel so good that I could call Zappos, kind of like the Butterball hotline, and just say, hey, how do I cook a turkey? That is so powerful to consumers right now.
And just to echo that ability to innovate or pivot or lean into something, for that Zappos example that Darcy just mentioned, is how you navigate this, right? Anyone who's thinking that the status quo is relevant to them probably should be out of business. And so if you're not innovating in either out of it or into it, so to speak, then I don't see how anyone who's kind of with their head under a rock or can come out of this with any kind of health, brand health, or business health.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think consumers have learned to become suspicious and suspect of pandering and trying for a brand to artificially cozy up, and I think that is going to become more so. I think people are going to be more discerning, and I know now, like for example, I've been watching Hulu, and so there's advertising, I can tell when there's an ad that was developed before this whole thing. It's so obvious.
Yeah.
And it really turns me off. It really makes me like, wow, they're not paying attention. And I'm like, I don't like that brand. They're not paying attention to what's going on now. I think that is just, I think everybody's got to wipe their slate clean and start over.
Yeah, that's very true. One more question before we kind of shift focus. I think, and you segued beautifully into this question, Pam, we can all agree that everybody feels a little bit testy and unsettled right now. And that can come out in ugly ways online, just like you alluded to at the beginning of the panel, Paul. Preparation is really key to avoiding these public relations landmines. I think that we've covered that. How can brands kind of gut check the reaction that they're likely to receive as they prepare their communications to go live? Do you guys have any tips on how to kind of micro test or, put some messaging out there in soft ways so you can get a bead on the likely reaction?
I would say get as many people in the room as you can to assess what your message is, what your content is. Get as many skeptics and cynics in the room as you can, and challenge them to come up with all of the different ways that this brilliant idea that we have, what are all the different ways that this great piece of creative is going to backfire? Have people do a kind of a red team approach where they say, here's why this is a terrible idea.
Yeah, I love that, Paul. I also think, there's, this is, such an era of one-to-one, you're always going to have those people where it's not received well. The message is very, is not resonating. And I think the gut check could come in the form of really a protocol document. And I'm thinking really in social media here, specifically paid advertising and organic content, but a protocol document that really covers all bases, that can be crafted either by the agency or the client, that gives team members who are managing those conversations really good fodder and a consistent message to use when those messages or questions or negative comments start coming in, so that there's not this note of panic. It's actually more of a proactive approach. We recently worked with a retailer who was getting a lot of backlash for staying open in the very early stages of this crisis. And, we had to quickly come together and form a protocol document and respond real time alongside them with feedback on how would you respond? What would you do from a PR perspective to be more proactive with the messaging to kind of quell some of the responses that we've been getting?
Yeah. Anybody else have any ideas on that? Yeah, team, we tend to call them pre-mortems. Let's think ahead. And if this idea dies, what is the thing that's going to have likely killed it? And solve it in advance. So a great deal of importance, I know, is being placed on external marketing communications right now, and rightly so. But I don't want to ignore the importance of internal communications, how we're talking to staff, vendors, partners, investors. So let's talk a little bit about this before we move on. And for those of you who've joined us since the beginning, be aware that we're going to have a couple of times that we take questions from all of you. There's a QA option down at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and just start typing in questions if there's anything that you want us to address when we get to some of those break points in the conversation, and we'll get to as many as we possibly can. Darcy, kind of going back to you, I know that you work with an incredibly wide array of brands, as does Team. It's kind of fun right now, isn't it? What recommendations are you making to your clients about the level of transparency that they should be offering their employees, their contractors, their vendors?
Yeah, that's a great question, Trish. There's actually a quote by Richard Branson, who, by the way, is not one of my favorite individuals out there, but I think it's a great quote. Clients do not come first, employees come first. If you take care of your employees, they will take care of the clients. And I think this quote really, as I was preparing for today, really resonated with me, because what Moore has done, the steps Moore has taken to ensure that employees feel safe, that employees feel supported, has actually served as an example to our clients. We've had a couple clients say, gee, I really wish I could bring this level of transparency through to my teams, but things like 2 flexible work days, mental health days for the staff. This really benefits all staff members, but particularly parents. We also have flexible work schedules, so we can schedule our day accordingly. And just really proactive communications from our founders, as well as our president, about the steps that the company has taken to shore up resources and the contingency plans that have been put in place. So I think it's a tough question, but I also think it's really answered through the steps that my agency has taken and really demonstrated then as an example through to our clients.
Yeah, that's great. It's nice to work for an organization like that.
I feel very lucky.
Yeah. Max, you're one of the most soulful leaders I know. On a personal, on an emotional level, what should business owners and managers be cognizant of when they're having to deliver hard news, which people are right now? Layoffs, acknowledging unknowns. How can they address their ecosystems in a gentle way?
That's a great question. And, perfect segue from the Richard Branson kind of example of that quote and how potentially his own personal actions and how he's treated his employees and his businesses do not match up with what he's done, right? He's furloughed so many people. I think a little bit of self-awareness, or a lot of self-awareness for any agency leader right now is drastically needed. And you try to basically shorten the distance between what your words are and what your actions are. And certainly in this time and throughout, I guess, humankind, actions always speak louder than words. So I think, if you were approaching the team, I think there has to be 2 real main elements of reinforcement. One is you want to reinforce the why, right? To use a Simon Sinek trope, I guess at this point. You want to remind people why we do the work that we do, why we get together, what is the reason to the creativity that we want to put out in the world, what is the meaningful benefit that we can give. But probably more important now is telling the team how you're going to do it, right? And the how is typically given short shrift, and it's in the advertising or the communications industry. Right now, the how that I'm seeing is usually revolving around furloughs and layoffs, right? It's not really revolving around innovative ideas or pivots out, right? So the how has to be interesting, right? I mean, the how has to be, kind of commendable and require a belief system for people to understand. I don't see a lot of the hows in our industry in terms of that right now, other than kind of the baseline of cutting costs and cutting overhead. So ultimately, any leader just right now, for the first time ever, potentially in some careers, is you have to be very comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that has to also kind of be a factor of self-awareness in that this uncomfortability is going to be here for a while. And there's no way to get out of it. But how can you be creative? How can you create interesting ways of showing people how you're going to survive? I think that's the key component.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul, another important dimension is maintaining confidence for the survivors. And you and I kind of talked about this in prepping for this panel. The people who are staying, what advice do you have to maintain goodwill and performance after you may have gone through some of these hard cost-cutting measures?
Sure. So a couple thoughts on that, and we have put these into practice with several of the clients we've assisted in recent weeks with cost reductions and other tough news. And obviously be as transparent and honest as you can, up to the point that you can't. Leaders need to be human and authentic and acknowledge, the pain associated with some of these decisions. If you are a company that has no choice but to reduce staff, I would advise explaining every step you took up to that point in order to control costs before you had to start impacting humans, reducing capital expenditures and admin costs and, senior executive salary reductions. And then lastly, you've got to maintain a feeling of confidence in the future of the business and remind everybody, as I think Max was saying, of why are we here? What's the why? What's the vision, without overpromising, because none of us know where this is going. Things could get better, or things could get a lot worse. So don't say that the pain is over, because the pain may not be over.
Yeah, totally agree with that we don't know yet. Are there going to be waves of this thing? I guess just kind of weighing in on something that we've done at Team within our own internal dynamic, because we were having to cut some costs, as most people were. We've, I think, been very lucky. I'm very grateful that, we haven't had to actually lay off any staff, but we just had some candid conversations about the fact that we essentially needed to get one FTE back, and multiple staff members were willing to pare back a little bit on both hours and compensation to equate to an FTE without losing anybody. And so that was actually helpful in that case, to pull the team into the conversation instead of me trying to make those decisions in a vacuum, and maybe make the wrong one. So yeah, opening up can sometimes be really helpful. Paul, this also, I think, is kind of in your wheelhouse. We have this group of companies now that are deemed essential businesses, and they have to stay open. What suggestions do you have for providing education, safety gear, protocols, and helping convince employees that it's safe to keep coming to work?
Yeah. Explain to them why it's essential. Don't just say we're essential and expect they'll take your word for it. One of our clients so when you buy a can of Lysol, they don't make the Lysol, but they make the can. And there Lysol and canned foods and other packaged goods obviously flying off the shelves. And so tell them a story, paint them a picture about their work making the cans that the Lysol goes in. Help them visualize how that actually is helping with the situation, helping consumers. Lean on experts. Make sure that you are referring or relying on expert advice from CDC and state and county health authorities, and make that clear and provide examples of how their advice is impacting what you're doing in the workplace. And then third and last, kind of a controversial suggestion in a manufacturing environment. If you are an essential business and you are trying to keep your production lines going, in a lot of cases, plants are saying no non-essential visitors. If I were the CEO of a manufacturing company, I would exempt myself from that, and I would appear on the plant floor in full PPE, just to show appreciation for the people who are coming in, clocking in at that plant every day, and turning out those Lysol cans. Be present. Don't just show up on a video call, but be present on the plant floor.
That's a very Paul suggestion. Pam, I wanted to talk to you about some of the difficulties that you can have with navigating these difficult internal conversations in a small company. Personal relationships and these almost familial politics can come into play. How's Asenza advising your small business clients on coping, with these conversations?
Yeah, so we do work with a number of startup brands and small companies, and oftentimes the president, CEO is chief bottle washer. They schlepper, balancing the books. I mean, typically small teams, and so when you have a company of 5 to 10 people versus 50 to 100 people, the upside is there's more dedication. There's more like common drive towards the mission, but then it can also be there's more at stake, and so personal vulnerabilities and fears are a concern, and small companies are really at risk right now. Businesses, unless you're making a COVID recession-proof product, you're scared. And ultimately, some companies are having to make hard decisions. And regardless, if you're at the helm, like, you've got to do what you need to do for the good of the company. It's more difficult because, you know, as the president, you may have been at the birthday party of your admin assistant's daughter last year, and then today you've got to let her go. So, I mean, there's no roadmap. It's hard. I mean, you know, if heads have to roll, you're going to notice it. It's going to be more painful when you've got 10 people and now you've got 5 versus if you're 100 people and now you have 85. So a lot of the challenges are the same. I think it's just more personally felt and more personally painful.
Yeah, I would agree. I would completely agree. And this is a time when I think it's more important for all of us to kind of remember our basic human kindness more than ever. Yeah, definitely. What do all of you recommend for small brands? So focusing on small brands and even maybe independent contractors or little shops that, you know, have a handful of people and they're kind of communicating outward. What do you recommend for brands that don't have an agency guide? Are there some resources that you found helpful? Is there any advice you have to give on how they can kind of work through some of these communication questions on their own? I know at Team, we've tried to create some resources. Darcy and Paul, I know you guys have been pushing a lot of content out as well. So I know the Linhart, the Team websites have some advice, but are there any other sources or tips you can think of that might be helpful?
So I wouldn't consider myself a branding expert, although I love talking about brands. With that, I think it's important to almost go back to the brand's drawing board of the mission vision and what are those values? What is the value statement? And some brands may have this, some may not, but from there, what are we trying to push out? What are we trying to communicate that ties back to the vision and mission? How does our messaging need to recognize the times that we're in, but still hold true to who we are, to our authenticity? And I think that's a simple whiteboard exercise, but an important one.
Yeah, agree.
I think that's a huge point that Darcy just made is if there's any silver lining to a pause in business, it's this, right? It's the ability to take stock, to breathe, to turn around and really say, hey, is my why, let's just keep going with this trope, right? Is my why the same now as it was a year ago or 5 years ago or when I founded it? And reframe it of like, what were the solutions that I was providing, whether it's as a service, as a product, as a brand, as an individual, what was it that I was providing that is now fundamentally changed because of the influx of humanity, Trish, to your point, that we are now faced with, right? Like with this influx of humanity, why wouldn't you want to become more human-centric as a brand? And if you weren't that, why wouldn't you take this time in order to figure out how to become that? Because there is no going back. So this diabolical pause could be a really good exercise and some really good medicine for a lot of these smaller shops to really re-energize themselves and repivot or redirect themselves into something that could possibly be an entirely new kind of business model, but also just a new purpose or mission statement or a new way to recruit people. And once you have that, then perhaps the playbook that you would want to pursue is transparency, authenticity, vulnerability, right? And because you have nothing to hide if you figured out why you exist, right? If you figured out that you're going to be more human in your approach, why not show it? And why hide behind veneer or message? And just kind of go out there and kind of see what happens, I guess, because there's really nothing left to lose at this,
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, brands big and small have an incredible opportunity right now to ask themselves, what do our consumers need from us? What are their genuine, human needs, and how can we meet those needs, whether they make the cash register ring or not? To the extent that easy to say, but to the extent that you can focus on how can we meet a genuine consumer human need, whether it's good for us in the short term or not. Even if it's not good for you in the short term, it's likely to be good for you in the long term. as Darcy or Pam said, consumers will remember, brands that stepped up and were genuinely helpful during this time.
Yeah, and I think there is value in small businesses, even taking a page or looking at some of those big brands that are doing this well. I was blown away by a story the other night and known about this for a couple of weeks of GM just saying, okay, what do we have? What can we work with here? We have an employee workforce. We have the tools. We have the technology to make ventilators. And I have to hand it to GM for being able to move that ship so quickly to adjust and to adapt. And their employees are getting so much, at least the ones that were quoted are getting so much value from making ventilators for people who need it, who need them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Do you have anything to add, Pam?
I think that authenticity, at the end of the day, I think we all agree, whatever the size of the company is, however many people you have, whatever kind of messaging you're doing, whether it's media relations or email marketing or blogging or social media, it is really about connecting and about establishing a relationship and a dialogue.
Yeah, agreed. Before we kind of shift to external, and I want to take some questions as well, I want to address kind of another bucket of internal communications that we haven't talked about yet. When one business doesn't get paid, there's this ripple effect that happens through their ecosystem. It impacts everybody downstream. It leads to payment delays, contractor order cancellations. Companies are having to renegotiate terms sometimes. What recommendations do you all have for communicating with partners and vendors about what's going on, maybe with, the fiscal state of your company, or how you're going to be able to continue dealings with them?
Boy, it's such a trickle. It's such a domino. Holy, and I have to check myself every now and then because, as a PR team, we're always coming to our clients with our wish list, like, wow, wouldn't this be a great opportunity? And we don't realize the domino that sets off on the back end that isn't even possible anymore. So I think it's a matter of really reining in and reassessing what kinds of recommendations, who's involved, if it's a supply chain demand, like, what is that going to look like? And really kind of getting into the bones of the brand and understanding that, it really, there's an origin, there's a source and an origin, and people are responsible for that. I just can't even believe, you're hearing about like what's happening with, the chickens and how they're having to kill chickens because there's no food service, and like these things that we're having to think about that we never had to think about before, smashing eggs, dumping milk. There's just, the distribution isn't there. I think it goes down. You really have to take that as a page for, who your client is and check yourself.
Anybody else have any ideas on those vendor, partner, supply chain conversations that might be tough?
So there are three things that we're doing, Ed, Linhart, Trish, that I think speak to what you're getting at. Number one, in terms of our own supply chain, we have dialed back on our work with contract employees. We have some great contract employees who are our former staff members who we've worked with for quite a while. And we have dialed that back in the most humane way that we can so that we can make sure that the billable work is going to people who are on the payroll. So that's on the side of what are we buying. On the side of what are we selling, we've always done a good job of keeping an eye on receivables. We have gotten, politely militant about that to an even greater degree. And as we finish an assignment for a client, we don't necessarily wait till the end of the month to invoice for that. We finished it on the 23rd. We're going to send an invoice on the 24th. And then we're also keeping a eagle eye on cash flow. We know when every payroll is. We know when when are we going to get paid for the work that we did in March. So we're just really keeping a very, very close eye on that, even to a greater degree than we usually do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everybody's in that boat. Cash is king right now. Any more thoughts on internal communications? Otherwise, I'm going to take a couple of questions that we have. And if any of you who've joined us want to use your QA function at the bottom of the Zoom panel, type in some questions. We're getting ready to take a few minutes and answer a few. Okay. This is an interesting question that came in, and this is a good perspective from independent contractors. So as independent contractors, we want to support our small business clients and make sure they survive. Do you recommend doing some free or no charge work to show loyalty and hopefully retain their loyalty? Or is this setting a bad precedent?
That's a great question. So I think the intention has to be set right? If the intention is more of a collaborative approach or a collaborative coming to the table, I think that's right. I think if it's desperate or painted into a corner kind of approach, that you probably would want to say no to that. But I do think that overall, from what I'm seeing in terms of across all industries, right, is this real kind of intentionality of collaboration. Competitors collaborating, different suppliers coming together in very unique ways to Frankenstein a solution that, quickly. So that intention of wanting to help, that intention of jumping in, that intention of bringing in expertise or thought leadership should be free. It typically is when you collaborate. There really isn't that much of a monetary quid pro quo. So if that's the intention, yeah, go all. I think free is the new black. In terms of finding new opportunities and new collaborations and new creativity, absolutely. But if it's coming from an intention of pain or desperation, I'd be very careful about how much of that you do.
Yeah, I'll just add. I think client and agency relationships are human to human at the end of the day. And I think that we all have clients where that human connection is really rich and deep, and it's a long-term, deep, value connection. I would say, in those instances, it is worth offering, consultation and support. I mean, we're doing this for a couple of clients. It's not in our scope to provide crisis, but we have clients who have nowhere else to turn, and they are calling us at all hours of the day for their support, and we're happy to provide it. I think to Max's point, where it feels opportunistic, I think that is a flag.
No, I want to add to Darcy what you just said. Really, we're looking at like who's buttering our bread, and let's take care of those people. And I have contract employees who work for me that I pay hourly. And, I do have an eye on billable hours because that definitely affects cash flow every month. But like in terms of our clients, if a client needs me, needs advice, needs an ear, I turn the clock off. I turn the timer off. I've taken calls earlier in the morning. I'm taking calls later in the day. I know we have been asked to weigh in for some of our smaller clients in areas that kind of fall out of our wheelhouse, but actually showcase that we can do more than what you thought we could do. And we're thinking, well, maybe this will benefit us down the road as well. But I think taking really good care of the clients who you have and who are paying you right now is good karma, if nothing else.
Yeah, I agree. I think that just to recap that, if it's motivated from the right place, if it's right sized to what you're able to do kind of with a happy heart, and it's not just completely self-serving, then I think the opportunity to serve clients for free, no charge, or at reduced rates is a great measure of goodwill right now. So all about that. Another good question from Kelsey. What's the hardest decision you've personally had to make during this crisis so far? Anybody want to take that one?
I would say because we're all remote, because we're all working from home, we've kind of lost a sense of the workday. There's a stat out there that people are working 40% more from home. And so this is kind of a fluffy answer, but I think it's really a day-by-day assessment of those boundaries and what you're willing to commit to work. How do you need to continue to keep self-care in mind? And then if you're balancing family and other needs, like how does that equation get balanced out every day so that you're not in kind of a burnout mode constantly?
Yeah. I know for me, it was having to ask some staff members to cut back compensation, even though it's short term. It's a rough time to have to ask people to do that. Luckily, our team's been incredibly gracious and very very close knit. But that, you know, it's just not something you want to have to do as a business owner.
The hardest decision that I've had to make is really a self-discipline thing, and it's the decision and commitment to not worry about bad things that haven't happened yet. You know, there's a whole range of tough choices that you know many of us have had to make or may yet have to make. But we need to know what those situations are and have a plan and have options, but focus on what's happening in the here and now, and don't spend all of your time obsessing about what may happen, you know, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year from now. You know, stay focused on the shit that we're all dealing with right at the moment, as opposed to, you know, what may be coming at us down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll take a couple more and then I'll weave some into the next section. This one from Juan. What about sustainability when you're in survival mode? What happens with sustainability initiatives? Granted, some of them may not cost money or take a lot of labor, but some clearly do. I guess this gets back a little bit to mission and vision and why are we here? How important is it to stay true to those things?
Agreed. And I think, you know, to paraphrase what Paul said earlier is, you know, doing good is good business. That's kind of been, I wouldn't say solidified, but it's the going hypothesis in culture right now for brands large and small. So that's, you know, whether it might seem like it's an expense now, but at the end of the day, it's an investment, right? So to pull back on that doesn't make sense. I mean, I would pull back on other things. You know, if you're thinking about overhead costs, et cetera, maybe not HR costs, but just how you want to scale down a little bit. But you know, messing with the planet just to save money doesn't seem like a good idea at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. A question for you, Max. Have you seen any great examples of events outside of conferences that, you know, are pivoting when people's gatherings are restricted? There's a lot of smaller suppliers, caterers, event planners whose businesses have really just been turned completely off. Old operating models may not come back. Are there examples of event structures that are doing it right?
Well, I mean, I think the most earliest manifestations of these kinds of pivots really is going virtual, right? And then kind of segregating the event experience. And by that, I mean like a B2B experience or a concert or whatnot, and really compartmentalizing it or miniaturizing it. And then, you know, with that comes a lot of Zoom fatigue and et cetera. So I think there's a lot of companies that went quickly or pivoted quickly into let's just kind of make it smaller, cooler, and digital, but they forgot the surprise and delight and the physicality of it as well. And what I see a lot is this, I call it mixed physicality, where you might have a Zoom party, for instance, but the brand coordinates a DoorDash delivery for everyone on the Zoom call for that comes to their house, for instance, right? Or some sort of like digital to physical that doesn't require a lot of people being in one place at one time. So there's this disintermediation that's occurring that's really interesting in the ability to use existing platforms like a DoorDash or Postmates or whatnot, and then existing media platforms like Zoom or Instagram Live or all these other things, and seeing how the two can interact. But certainly, you know, when you talk about big B2B events like Dreamforce, Salesforce, or Cisco Live, or any huge auto show in any huge city, you know, the budgets, the production budgets for that are through the roof. And there's all that vendor padding that exists, right? Whether it's caterers or security or load in, load out. And now what we're seeing is there's a big cultural acceptance of low budget, right? We're not that, it doesn't have to be that high budget. And because digital just does make it scalable and a little bit more manageable, I'd be really hard pressed to prognosticate that the new normal going forward would be a reinflation of those kinds of budgets, and really going back to that kind of padding. I think that vendor, to going back to our discussion about vendors and down the chain, I think from an experiential and B2B and marketing and event perspective, that's where a lot of the pain is going to be felt. Which is, the vendors that are feeding these large scale experiences. I just don't see that kind of scale and largesse coming back for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, and I'm by no means an event expert, but I would predict that folks who are into VR, AR, they're going to be ahead of the game in terms of, if conferences or events are intended to sell a product or service where brands can quickly stand up an immersive experience virtually, I think they're going to be ahead, but that's just prediction of one.
Yeah. No, very helpful, guys. Let's, I've got a couple of other questions queued, but I think they're going to kind of fit after this next section that we're about to discuss on external communications. So just know that I will get to them. And let's shift our focus outward now, talk about some of the challenges of engaging with customers, the media, our communities during this global pandemic. Pam, Asenza does a ton of content marketing, I know, and despite all the disruption, consumers are online more than ever right now. How are your clients shaking up their content calendars to fit a new reality and kind of appeal to their audiences during this time?
Yeah, so we pretty much wiped our content calendar clean at the end of March, and kind of started over. I mean, a lot of it had to do with what was going on the client side, new product launches, being in natural products. March is a big month for us because of Natural Products Expo in Anaheim, and everything went down literally like the day before. I mean, there were people already in Anaheim getting ready to go to the show when they canceled the show. And so that started a domino of events that really affected our clients on product launches and timing. And again, this comes down to availability of materials for them to manufacture these products as well. So we downplayed brand forward content and really aired our messaging towards serving our clients' customers in a more personal way. So, the "we are here for you" is huge. Establishing a relationship through a dialogue. In fact, relationship is dialogue. So that being said, our job is still to help clients sell product, but brand awareness, storytelling, sharing kind of the "we're all in this together" message, authenticity is going to win over pushing sales lead generation. Yeah. So, it's a delicate balance. I've said this earlier, you don't want to come across as pandering. Every marketing email you get nowadays starts with something like, "I hope this finds you well." That's like, well, of course that's what we hope. How do you say that in a way that resonates with, that a brand cares, like really cares? So creativity is key. Keeping it simple. People are overwhelmed, even though we're home. We've got all this other stimulation going on that we're having to deal with. So, for our lifestyle brands, it's about nurturing, caretaking, suggesting ways consumers can make their quarantine life, more bearable. So our content is really geared towards that.
Kind of spinning off of that, Paul, this can be a really difficult time to distribute a press release. Even if you have something press-worthy to share. What guidelines is Linhart offering companies that are trying to continue PR efforts?
I don't know if this is going to feel like a direct answer to your question or not, Trish. So you can push back if not. What I'm encouraging our team to think about and to help our clients think about is, what would you do if you could never pitch a story again? If you could never put out another news release? If nobody picked up in the newsroom when you called, what would you do? how would you alter your marketing strategy and your communications mix if earned media couldn't be part of it? Because I think we're headed there, fast. There already has been obviously a trend toward, the business model of traditional media blowing up, and that's resulted in, depopulated newsrooms, and that trend, I think, is going to pick up steam over the next 6 to 12 months, because the retail advertising that pays for so much of the media model is going away.
Yeah.
So what else could you do if you couldn't pitch that story? If you do have a story to pitch right now, how does it connect to what's going on in the world? Are you able to talk about whatever your message is in a way that makes you seem, aligned with what's on the minds of your consumer, and make it relevant and not tone deaf?
Right. Absolutely. Max, digital engagement, we were kind of touching on this. There's an opportunity through digital tools to create a unique experience that kind of transcends place and time, our traditional notion of events. How do you recommend that brands apply some of the principles of experiential marketing to a landscape that's making in-person connection impossible? And I know you touched on this a little bit earlier, but is there anything else you wanted to share on that?
Yeah, and it's that mixed physicality that I think is going to be the most immediate playground, so to speak, in terms of where experiences and experiential goes. But the general definition of experiential at the moment seems to be focused or fixated on large scale events or bringing a lot of people together into one place. But there's such a wider aperture of experiential. Fearless Girl, that won everything 3 years ago, is experiential. Red Bull Stratus, that was like 5 or 7 years ago, and the guy jumped out of space, is purely experiential. Domino's paving for pizza. All this work out there really is experiential. And so, particularly if you look at it through the filter of real world actions, which I feel that like 80-90% of advertising that I see, that at least I pay attention to, is answering the question of what are brands doing in the real world to help me right now. Right. And those, by very nature, again, is kind of experiential. So I think there's going to be a lot of interesting ways that experiential marketers will have to change their mindset from how do we get a lot of people into one place to create an experience, to how do we create a lot of experiences for a lot of people everywhere. Right. And that kind of, flipping the yin to the yang, and that disintermediation that needs to occur is really exciting. In my opinion, because it allows for a deep curation and a deep appreciation for culture and trends and communication and creativity that a typical B2B conference or the large scale concert format hasn't really innovated in years.
Right.
So the idea that we can actually create a mirror to that, a lot of people in one place, what does that look like in culture, is super exciting.
Yeah. Does kind of blow the doors off what we've been doing for decades.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure. Darcy, question for you. I know that Moore works a lot in multicultural communications. Are you seeing any similarities or differences in communication patterns across these diverse ethnic or cultural segments of the market?
Yeah, Trish, great question. I think we could spend a whole other panel, by the way, talking about multicultural and audiences. I'll just stir up a couple of thoughts on this. One thing we know is that a good number of minority populations really need to be among a community and need to have that sense of community. And we're all being asked to stay at home. Most of us are self-quarantining. And this is a challenge for a lot of these populations who value trips to the grocery store, church gatherings, things of that nature. I think, there are also other populations who have a general distrust of government. And with that, it's most important to really consider the channels by which our message needs to come through, and really to take almost a grassroots approach to reaching these audiences and take it almost at the community level. And I know that can be challenging for big brands in particular, and I do think there's value in social there in particular. but we have seen some brands doing this well and others not so well. I mean, the key at the end of the day, regardless of the audience type, is to be as relevant as possible. And again, going back to my very first waxing poetic around social listening, depending on the tool and the sophistication of the tool, social listening can yield down to the the DMA, what conversations are being had and what is the role for the brand in those conversations to really support those multicultural audiences.
Yeah. Let me spin a attendee question off of that. Is social media more important during this time or less? Are people getting saturated?
I love this question all day. I do think it depends on the brand and what you're selling and kind of going to Pam's points around, does the brand have something of value to provide to its audience during this time? I think the fact is consumption of social media has skyrocketed. I think that people are seeking connection. Connection is the antidote to fear, which has been a state that frankly we've all been living in, or at least I have. And so people are seeking connectivity. People are turning to social media to kind of do that. I think it is a balance of, again, what does the brand have to say? And, is social media the appropriate vehicle to share that messaging and to add value? But I frankly think that if the message is targeted and it's really considerate, social media definitely has a role for most brands out there.
Well, and one of the interesting things, even not just looking at organic social, but also paid social, at the same time we're seeing this surge in social consumption. Ad rates are down 15 to 20%, I know, on Facebook and Instagram from what we're seeing. So there's an interesting opportunity there for brands that can do it right. Anybody else have a thought on is social oversaturated? Is it more or less important question?
Yeah, I'll chime in. I think that Darcy's absolutely right about the connection piece. Connection is the antidote to what a lot of us, I think, and a lot of consumers generally have been dealing with. And to the earlier point about what if you could never pitch a story again? What if securing earned media coverage was no longer possible? What would you do? Part of the answer to what you do is figure out a way to tell your stories on social and tell them as part of a dialogue as opposed to a one way. So yeah, I think social is certainly more important than ever.
Yeah. Seeing head nodding. Darcy, before we spin off of you, I know Moore supports state and government agencies, and they're scrambling to keep up right now with digital demand, call volume, public communications, causing a lot of frustration and angst as well. What are you seeing in terms of trends that with government bodies? How are they trying to serve their communities? How are they doing?
Well, we're fortunate to work with government entities that recognize the value that an agency like Moore brings. At the end of the day, government entities are out there to support their constituents in their markets. And so a lot of our clients have turned to us in crisis mode to say, our web environment is not set up to support providing our audiences with quick information about COVID. I think it really does depend. I mean, one of our largest clients, CareerSource Florida, they're in the workforce space, so they connect people to jobs in the state of Florida. They turn to us to stand up a Help Us Here campaign, which we did in a couple of days. And what I love about this campaign is that it got to the core of what the brand is about, which is connecting people to jobs. It doesn't try to overpromise. It's not going to try and find people jobs who can't necessarily find them. And then with that, we've been able to beef up social media, community engagement. We had our protocol document established to kind of address any comments or questions. I think the government agencies that are doing this well recognize that they have to pivot. Florida Department of Agriculture is another one for school lunches. These kids need access to breakfast and lunch. And so working with us, we can kind of help them move quickly and nimbly to get things stood up. I think we have seen, not our clients, but other government entities really struggle and just kind of run in circles on what do we do? What's our place? How do we meet the needs of our consumer? So it's been varied, but we're lucky to have pretty great government clients.
That's good. Yes, I would agree. Some are doing better than others. Some agencies and municipalities are doing better than others. I have a question for all of you, and then I want to move on kind of the advertising, sales, proactive marketing piece. What should a brand do if they get a bad reaction? If they put something out there and they really get a vicious backlash from it, what do you recommend to kind of diffuse the situation and get their footing back under them? Come on, I'll call on one of you.
I think if that happens, it's important to understand why you're getting a bad reaction. Is it a Twitter troll with too much time on their hands who starts the ball rolling, or what? Understand what was the mistake that you made before you rush to overreact to it. But if you genuinely feel that you have made a mistake, if you have done something that's not aligned with your brand values and somebody's calling you out on it, then fix it.
Yeah, could not agree more. Let's move into kind of the advertising and sales. I'd like to start with a question for all of you. So as important as it is to be sensitive to the social climate that's being caused by the coronavirus pandemic, businesses also have to continue to promote themselves. They have to sell products and services to stay alive. So what recommendations do you have for appropriately maintaining marketing and revenue generation during this time? What are appropriate ways to promote yourself?
Yeah, I guess I'll start. So here at More, we've established really a kind of a three-phased approach in terms of how we attack and manage through this crisis. It's actually spun off of the McKinsey model, but it's engage, emerge, and elevate is kind of the three aspects to it. And I promise I won't wax poetic for too long, but really engage has been about really stabilizing impacts of COVID on internal and external audiences. And I would say we're kind of getting towards the end of engage and really getting into emerge. And I think with emerge, it's really, we're working with our clients to help them navigate marketing communications while still in the midst of this, but kind of emerging out of it. And so, and I can share this document with any of our attendees here today, but this is really emerge opportunity is really an opportunity to bring confidence back to all audiences, at pre-crisis levels. And I think there's some questions that can be asked. One is, how can you stimulate demand in this new day of your products and services? What challenges and opportunities will be at play when the economy reopens, understanding it may be in stages for your audiences. And then what strategies are needed to align to the new mindsets and perceptions of your audience and conditions of the marketplace. So I guess this is all this to say, there are some key questions that I think brands can be thinking about and really preparing as we look to kind of emerge out of this crisis.
Yeah.
That was long.
No, that's good. And I wanted to, because it kind of piggybacks nicely onto what we're talking about right now, just pull in a question from one of our attendees, Sarah, asking a little bit about the timeline for that. So you're kind of addressing the components of it, but what will the cues be to start transitioning your messaging back to explicit marketing? She said, we're currently in support mode. What can we do to help? Not directly selling and promoting our product portfolio. But right now they're trying to be sensitive, putting their launches and campaigns to the side. Any tips on the timeline for that, or maybe what some of the indicators would be that it's okay to start turning on proactive promotion again? That's a tough one right now, I know. Mm-hmm. The rules are being written as we go.
Yeah, I mean, the advice we've given, and again, it depends on the industry or the vertical, to some of our clients is really a little bit of not only kind of assessing And this is really state by state at this point. You know, when that sense of fear is really going to subside and we're in this mode of true recovery, to me, that's one piece. But the other piece is really the economy, and reading the tea leaves and trying to understand where is this economy headed, Q3, Q4. Because I think the economy, it obviously plays in so much to appetite for a specific product or service.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Darcy. I think that geography actually does come into play here in a way that it hasn't in the past, because you have states like New York or California that are in very, very different situations and under very different kind of regulatory stress than other states that aren't under lockdown or shelter at home orders at all. And so that could, I think, play into how people are targeting promotion. And I agree with the industry perspective as well. You know, healthcare, tech tools that are enabling remote work and remote meetings and events and things like that, they're cranking. Other areas are really suffering. So anybody else have any thoughts on the timing and indicators to kick in again?
Well, so like we work a lot in the earned media space, and I appreciate Paul's insight there because it makes me shake my shoes a little bit. And I agree. I think that it is a dying space, but it is still alive right now. And so these media, for example, the editors of the glossy women's magazines who we're going to be starting to work on holiday, you know. Somebody out there is thinking to December, come June, when they're planning these print books. And so, like for us, we typically have a rollout calendar that has a lot of seasonality themes. And that's really hard right now because we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen in 3 months, 6 months. I mean, you know, I've heard people say, don't spend any money on booking trade shows for next spring, you know, and then all of a sudden you go into real fear mode, like, what, next spring? So it is a day by day. And I think, you know, it's our job too, to reassure the client that, you know, there's still opportunity out there, that we are listening to them. We're also serving our constituents, our media, the people who we are talking to, who we hope are talking to our clients' customers.
Right.
So
I know there is definitely an element of just keeping your ear to the ground and not locking into anything that's too rigid and too far in advance, where you could end up painting yourself into a corner.
Right.
I would agree with that. On this subject, and Paul, I was going to kind of direct this question to you, but sort of to everybody. What industries or sectors are faring better or worse that you're seeing right now? Are there some surprise winners and losers that our attendees may not expect, and that maybe they can capitalize on in some way in their own business?
You know, I don't know that there are a lot of surprise winners or losers. I mean, I guess on the surprise loser front, something it's been a surprise to me is in healthcare and seeing, you know, our healthcare system and especially hospitals just being severely impacted negatively by this whole thing, because they have had to put off elective surgeries that pay the bills. That has been a distressing surprise to me. Maybe it shouldn't be. In terms of surprise winners, I think industries that provide for our basic needs in times of great, you know, turbulence and change. You know, I think there are certain, you know, segments of the food industry that have obviously done very, very well. You know, certain technologies that enable us to connect and communicate. Social media certainly has done great. You know, I think Facebook reported earnings today, and no surprise, they were, you know, very, very good. I'll just come back. I'll end by coming back to, you know, news media. I do think that business model is going to get more and more and more stressed, and you know, I don't know how well they're going to emerge from this.
Yeah, I would agree. Max, I wanted to circle back to you. What ideas can you share for listeners around social good initiatives, cause marketing, community engagement? I'm thinking of things that are authentic and are helpful to their communities, but also create opportunity for visibility and sales. Do you have any advice around how to leverage some of those for their marketing value in an appropriate way?
Yes, I do. I mean, I think overall, what I'm seeing is, and kind of dovetailing with winners and losers, is brands and companies that are outwardly and actively supporting their own employees and doing everything that they can to save jobs and save their vendor relationships, et cetera. Those are the ones that seem to be showing their intentionality and showing their purpose. And so, acts, not adverts, so to speak, is the way to go about this for probably from now on.
Yeah.
And so, I see like a winners, like a lot of the telcos that traditionally up until before then were, it was just it's a price battle really, and interchangeable, and seemed to be like a commodity. But the way that they're showing value and service, whether it's remote learning for kids or whether it's live streaming events, et cetera, they're really kind of elevating their importance all of a sudden in culture. And so they don't really need to run a lot of ads at this point, because they're finding a ton of advocates and supporters that are going to be potentially customers for life. So those kinds of actions, remember the competitive battleground for those guys have been churned. Now potentially it's changed that competitive battleground, because they're finding a lot of advocates and a lot of like people who really like them all of a sudden because of the things that they're doing. So I think showing that you care about people is probably the best way to do anything for the foreseeable future, right? And it starts with showing that you care about your own employees first. And then the other thing is, showing results. So instead of saying we're supporting our local food banks, you end up saying last week we provided 38,000 meals, right? So this idea of kind of like really focusing on the end result, not the middle part, not like the story element, but real tangible effect, really seems to be winning a lot. And I read an article a week and a half ago that some of these advertisements on TV that show what real world actions look like and the impact that it has have similar favorability ratings that Super Bowl ads do and have, right? And these are ads that were put together in 2 weeks from, 13 different bedrooms. And they're out on television and they're really driving affinity and relevancy and trust and all those things, but really showing and talking about the effects, not the intention, not like your support of anything, but what did you do? It's kind of like show me the money, but instead of that, it's kind of like show me the good. And really kind of and highlight that as much as possible.
Yeah, I agree with that. We have a client that's in construction on the East Coast, and one of the social engagements or posts that we've gotten the most engagement with recently was for a food drive. But what was so nice about it was that it was really images of the team actually participating. And yeah, the total of food that was collected and donated by this company. So I agree with you on, yes, the story may matter, but only as it leads up to the culmination, what actually was accomplished. I love that. Yeah, I love that. So this is an interesting question. How can people maybe adapt their typical sales approaches and even update sales scripts to kind of fit the moment? I know we've touched already on kind of tie everything back to our present reality. Any other tips though for how people may be able to, on sales calls, or if they have a team out there, if they're still working with, prospective customers or deals, what are some of the things they can do to be socially sensitive while they're selling? Any thoughts?
This is more of a riff, but depending on the product or service, you could almost reverse engineer like a keyword search volume report out of Google to see what topics are yielding the highest volume. What are some of the questions that your audience is asking within Google? So this is less to do with what the response would be, but more to say, what are those burning questions, and do we need to develop an FAQ or a dedicated, page on our website that has these items updated to refer people to? So that's more of like a paid strategy, but I think Google has tons of data on what's important to your consumer and your target, and then how can you act on that to meet them where they are.
Yes, a frightening amount of data. And I do think that in sales scripts where we used to be more focused on just pain points, gain points, cost, benefit analysis, that this is a time to be a little bit more human around how your product or service can actually make a, in-game impact on people's lives in a positive way, instead of just, hey, we're the cheapest, or we have this widget or gadget or feature. Any other thoughts on that before we move on? We have about.
I would just add as well is the authenticity piece that Pam mentioned, and I think we all are as marketers kind of really pay attention to, because that's the human oomph that really catches our attention, right? Is how authentic it is. But and to that point is self-awareness and authenticity around, like, what's your point of view? Like, what's your, what do you have to say? And if you don't have a point of view, don't say it. You know what I mean? Like, so there's like this element of, like, now more than ever, point of view from an anthropomorphical perspective for a brand or a company is really important, because that's the thing that's going to be feeding the brand trust elements that people are going to really start gravitating to. So as much as you might want to be also solution-based, you also want to have that reason why you're solution-based, right? Or that why, or that point of view. And, I just read recently about Yeti, the cooler, and they created the Yeti Stream, which is just, cameras pointed to streams, outdoors. And it's brilliant, and it's so simple and it's easy, but it's clearly they have a point of view that for why they've done that, and people gravitate to that. So that script, you have to have some sort of juice. You need to have something interesting in a point of view to stand out. And we know this, but I think now more than ever, it's more important.
Yeah.
Well, and actions speak louder than words, kind of going back to what Paul said. I mean, the work that Publix is doing to really help these farmers buying food, basically cutting out the middleman and buying food directly to feed their grocery stores, that action is so incredibly powerful and will resonate with the consumer.
Yeah, agreed. Pam, I wanted, just before, we've got a few minutes left, like 8 minutes left. So we'll be wrapping up shortly. And if any of you have questions, I've got one in the queue, hit us with them now and we'll try to catch them at the end. But Pam, looking at the influencer space, a lot of celebrities and influencers have gotten a big black eye from hawking sponsored products or whining about sheltering at home from their mansions or various unseemly things. What advice would you give brands who are still trying to leverage their influencer partners effectively right now? Are there any kind of best practices? Oh, I can't hear you. Sorry, you're muted. There you go.
Yeah. I think best practices are as they always have been, which is you got to vet these people. And yeah, I mean, it's a touchy subject. Our feeling has been that influencer marketing was going to blow up at some point based on the direction we're seeing it going, that, anybody who can string together a few words and has a significant social media following can charge thousands of dollars to pump a brand. And so unfortunately, a few bad eggs have spoiled the dozen. These people are not journalists. They're expressing their own personal opinions. And for our smaller brands, in general, it's dicey to spend a lot of money on influencer marketing unless you have really vetted, where it's going, what their target audience is, making sure you get metrics, see what they've done for other brands in your space, for competitors. We're really careful about recommending influencer marketing. This was before COVID, and now more than ever, because it's a budget. It's a budget thing, and it also, it's reputation. So vetting, vet.
Vet. Yep. I'd love to hear from each one of you before we take a last question or two. Can you name one brand that's really doing it right now? And do you have one piece of closing advice for people who are listening? Anybody want to start?
Yeah, I'll start, Trish. I've been very impressed with Chipotle because they have provided two things in their brand marketing activity in recent weeks. They've provided two things that I think are sorely needed. One is connection, and the work that they've done with their Chipotle Together, virtual lunch events on Zoom, I think is providing connection for, in some cases, thousands of people. And it's not just about buy burritos, but it's, there are celebrity guests and live entertainment. And I think those have been terrific. People also need entertainment. And the Chipotle Challenge series with esports and enabling, people to compete with professional multiplayer, video game pros has been a way to keep, many thousands of people entertained. And so providing that connection and entertainment through the Chipotle brand and having it not just be about the food, I think has been great.
It's awesome. Anybody else have a rave review or a closing piece of advice?
I'll just share, you've heard from me on kind of some of my favorite brands. I also have to do a shout out for Pluto, the dog. I don't know if anyone has seen that dog. He's hysterical, he or she. Anyway, so I do think LinkedIn has done a great job in this time. I mean, they have the platform around connectivity. They took it one step further, launching a We're in This Together campaign, trying to do more work to support freelancers and small businesses to really offer help and then find and make connections between those businesses to really help them thrive. And just a wrap up point, I mean, I think these are unprecedented times. I think just continue to think about the opportunity to embrace the long view, asking questions around how can we continue to innovate? How can we use this time to better support our clients, to better support the needs of our internal team members?
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else have anything to share?
I like, I've been really pleasantly surprised by Microsoft, for that I, erroneously considered to be this giant behemoth, kind of robotic type of thing, but they've really shown their humanity, whether even before COVID when they were talking about paternity leave, but now like right away, they were one of the first companies that said we weren't going to be firing anyone and had like, paid sick leave, et cetera, providing free tools, providing small business loans, et cetera. Like they've just really stepped up. And I think it's an extension of the new CEO, Satya Nadella. But I also think that in a weird way, Bill Gates and how he's been out front in terms of like providing solutions, et cetera, that's been a halo effect for Microsoft in general. That's really kind of put them in the forefront of a lot of conversations, not just from a economic one, a technology one, a healthcare one, a social impact one, purpose one. Is all over. They're really occupying that space and doing it admirably, in my opinion, a lot.
Very good. All right, I've got two questions I'm going to take and then we'll close. This one, so it's from a consulting group. They've developed a collaborative and transformational leadership program, which is very relevant right now, dealing with leadership approaches around authenticity, communication, humanity, collaboration, creativity, trust. How can they, during this unique time, identify and then reach out to companies who may want to do this kind of fulfilling, valuable, self-actualizing work? Can you guys think of any creative ideas and Darcy, you kind of mentioned one earlier about kind of leveraging Google data backwards to find the people that are interested, but any ideas?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn could be appropriate here. LinkedIn is expensive, but the results, particularly, with InMail, are incredible, like a 30% average open rate on LinkedIn InMail campaigns. So I think, and the beauty of LinkedIn is you can be pretty targeted around keywords or business types that you're looking to recruit, and then I would utilize your sales team to do further vetting around, is this the kind of company that I would want to work with? I think you can get a lot from a 2-minute conversation on that front.
Yeah, definitely. Any other brilliant ideas? Totally agree, Darcy. All right. Last one from Juan. And how do you think influencers are going to adapt in order to get paid? Kind of touching on what you were talking about earlier, Pam. You're muted if you.
Well, let's go back to one of the overarching themes of this whole discussion, which is authenticity, and really delivering. I will say that I haven't had great experience with influencer marketing because our clients tend to have small budgets. And if we ask, one of our clients to spend $10,000 on an influencer campaign, and that doesn't go to, work that we're doing, we've got to be really sure that that is going to deliver an ROI. And it's just hard to say. It's kind of it's a very murky area.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to hear if somebody on the other panelists are really fans of influencer marketing. I just haven't had great experience with results and really demonstrating ROI. But we have.
I think as in the short to medium term, I think influencers are, from an experiential standpoint of view, they are an interesting way of they're a lure to get a lot of people to come into a digital or virtual space, right? And because they're digitally native. I think they could provide some value if you look at them as collaborative partners rather than as a media buy, so to speak,
yes.
Right? So if you're able to create, again, with a point of view and a solution-based kind of meaningful approach to what you want to put out in culture for their audiences, and usually influencers really care about their audiences and really don't care about the brands that pay them. Right. So it's an interesting kind of dynamic where you kind of want them to have equal favor.
Right.
But if you allow that collaborative nature to occur, then maybe there is some value to it. I also believe that there's going to be different platforms for different kinds of influencers. For instance, it's going to be a lot harder to work with TikTok influencers because of the measurability aspect and how you can tell whether they're influencers or not. And you can't buy followers, whereas on Instagram you can, or on Twitter you can, etc. So the format where that influencer finds their voice and their audience will dictate a lot of the collaborative elements that you want to pursue with them. But yeah, I agree. I think at this point, any kind of sponsored post from an influencer seems to fall on deaf ears.
Yeah. I'll just chime in and just say that there are influencer groups. For example, Moms Meet in the lifestyle space has done a really good job. They're expensive, but they do deliver good content. They do a lot of that back of the house work in making sure that the people who work with them are above board. But you're paying. I mean, it's like, I think $25 grand on the low end, and for a small brand, that's a lot of money. So. I think you just, got to look at what your budget is and how to allocate that. And nowadays, be hard pressed to say, yeah, throw 25 grand at something unless you are really sure that it's going to.
Agreed. No, thank you guys so much. And thanks to all of you who are joining us. I hope that some of these nuggets and insights will help you as you kind of wind your way through the next few months with your own businesses. We have recorded this panel discussion, and we're going to be sharing it out with all of you who RSVP'd, and we'll be pushing it out on all of our social channels as well in the next few days. We'll keep the dialogue going too. If you have any questions, please feel free to address any of us on our social channels, or reach out to us via email through Team, and we'll be glad to pass the questions along. Just hope you all have a great evening. Take care of yourselves. Go have a glass of wine or a beer and some dinner, and hopefully I will see all of you, my friends who joined the panel very soon in person. So thanks a bunch.
Thank you, Trish.
Thank you.
Great night. Bye, everyone.
Everybody.
Bye.